Hey, folks, welcome back to the Pulse. It is that time again. It's Stephen Friday. It's 11 o'clock Central Texas time. This is episode number 25 of Right Side Up with Steve Staggs. Episode 25, 2 hours apiece. This is 50 hours of content. And you know what, Steve, in the background, I think is bopping to that intro, man. I think he likes that sound. We got an extra guest we're adding in the second hour today, which is really cool, right? We're bringing in corroborating, supporting evidence, and that's going to be really cool in the second part of this. But I just want to welcome you back. Um, just a neat story happened last night. I wanted to share with you before we get into this. Um, I was watching Wales Only One on Westcott Crypto with Pulse Disciple, and I was like, my wife's like, because there's like F bombs like left and right. And my wife's hearing this because I don't have like my, headphones on. She's like, "What is this?" So I had to like step out of the room. I'm like, these are the guys, man. These are the cool guys. These are like the coolest guys in our entire community. And anyway, I made some comments in the chat, and Pulse Disciple, who I've never engaged with at all, he got it. He saw what we're doing here. And it's really interesting. And I don't mean just what we're doing here with Right Side Up, but what we're doing here in this kind of pulse chain ecosystem, but even broader than that, what is really going on? God's using the money. God is using the money to attract people like moth to flame. And you think about how strategic God is. And that's one of the big parts of all of this. And to think that the money is being used as a means to attract your attention and to say, "Oh yeah, you want this thing." Well, you know what? It's what you gain in the process of that. And it's what every great story is about. It's a story of redemption. And to see somebody see that, and it was kind of in an unlikely place because they weren't really talking about that sort of thing. And then he just got on a roll. It was so cool. So shout out to Pulse Disciple, Wales Only One, and Westcott Crypto, which they will probably never see this shout out, but you do what you can, right? So today I want to bless you. I want to bless you. This is they're calling this in the in the Hamas world the day of rage. And this was this call on October 13th, Friday the 13th. It would be one of rage. And of course I think of the Friday the 13th as evil. And what are we supposed to be doing? And so we're going to shine some light, the light of men, which is the light of Jesus. And we're going to shine that out today. So if you know anybody, share this with them. We're going to have a good time tonight or this afternoon. Okay. It's Friday. Just sit back and let's examine the edges of this together. First thing I want to do though, is I want to share with you this, because this is going to tee up everything we talk about, because Steve and I basically said, all right, let's see what the Lord does. And this is what we're going to do right now. We're going to look at this. So I listen to the Bible. That's how I consume the scriptures. Is I am an auditory learner. Okay. And so this is Hebrews 12:25. And I want this to smack you in the face like it smacked me in the face. Listen to this. See to it that you do not refuse him who speaks. What's funny is so many people are like, you got to come under the authority of the Bible. I'm like, no, I need to come under the authority of him who speaks. This is about as clear as it gets. And it just smacked me right between the eyes. See to it that you do not refuse him who speaks. Hold on. It sounds like him who speaks, I have a choice to refuse him. If they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, how much less will we if we turn away from him who warns us from heaven? So hold on, you're telling me there's somebody who's in heaven who speaks to us and we can refuse him? Hey, that sounds familiar. That sounds like what Steve's been talking about for 24 episodes. At that time, his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. I don't know if we talked about this, but one of the ways God has just spoken to me is through Haggai, the prophet Haggai 1 and 2. And it says, I will once again shake the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the dry land, and all that people desire will come. And you think about this idea of what people desire. Big bags, diamond hands, when Lambo, given over to indulgences or whatever it may be. And you think about this, that people would die at the hand of the sword of their brother. It's interesting, right? Who are our brothers and what's happening in this world and shaking. And so it says, once more, I will shake not only the heavens or the earth, but also the heavens. And this is spoken in Haggai as well. The words once more indicate, so he's emphasizing once more, indicate the removing of what can be shaken. That is created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. How amazing. What we talk about is we talk about the kingdom of God. And of course, when Jesus was here, what did he say? He's like, hey, it's near, it's here, it's upon us. It's interesting how we talk about this idea of what does it mean for heaven and earth to be one. What a neat concept. What an amazing picture of this idea of how do these things become one? And it says, I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. Once more indicated that you would remove of what can be shaken, that is created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. And you think about this remainder is this seamless integration, right? This taking over of the kingdom of God. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, think about that. Since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. Okay, I just wanted to share that, folks, because that just hit me directly between the eyes today. And in a wonderful way, because it was this encapsulation of like, hey, everything you and Steve have been talking about in one spot. And I know Steve has something to say about that. So let's ask him. Hey, Steve, how are you doing?
Hey guys, how you doing?
You doing okay?
I'm doing all right. I'm kind of playing tag with the sunshine coming in, so if you see me kind of moving around, and that's what I'm doing.
Well, when I first met Steve, the Lord said, listen to him. And I was like, is he an angel? So yeah, I can see the light will be following him around. It will make his halo glow here.
There you go.
It's so good to have you, Steve, and amazing. I'm excited about today's stream. I want to say hello to just a couple people here. Our buddy, Mike Ostel, is in the chat. He's like, convalescence is not everything it's cracked up to be, but Jesus is here as always. Yeah, it's funny. We think about, not always, chilling and relaxing is what everybody wants to do, right?
That's a guy who's netting it out.
That's
this
right.
stuff's for the birds.
That's right. Right. So, Mike, thanks for being here. Good morning to all my great friends. How cool is that we can be friends? I talked to Mike, I think, once on the phone. And then the rest has been through like chat and all this, but it's like we've known each other all our lives, and that's what's so cool about this. And I think it's more of the condition of our hearts and our willingness and desire to bear burdens and be integrated with people, even if they're a distance away.
Yeah.
Sam Camp's going to miss us here. He's running some errands, but thanks for catching us. Crypto Compassion, what's up, man? He's always so connected with the community, and I appreciate everything that you do. Hex Glenn is here. Hey, guys. Agents of Change, as usual. That's right. And I got to see the lovely Hexy Quinn this morning for a meeting, and so glad that you're here. You always bring uh, some joy to our streams. And Bearded Saint, you know, I don't know if I told you, but Bearded Saint's been around for a long time, and he and I have been on streams in my early days. And he had this big beard. I don't know what he's got now because he shaved it in between and all that stuff. But I spent some time talking to him, and this was before my dad passed. And I'm like, dude, you are a younger version of my dad. And it's just so cool that he's here today. Um, and then Tail 7, what's going on? Good morning, folks. Glad that you're here. So, Steve, I read Hebrews 12:25, and how cool, just for me, see it to it that you do not refuse him who speaks.
Yeah.
You know, I don't, you know, we've talked about a lot of different places in the word, right? We've like looked at different things. We're talking about all this. It's like I missed that. And then
Mm,
today it's like, whoop. What are
yeah.
your thoughts
Well,
about that? What are just your reactions there? I'm sure that there's something there.
well, my first reaction when you were reading that is, oh my goodness, I wonder if Joe is seeing this intro. he he sent me a verse yesterday, um, that he asked me what the, if I could offer a rendering of it based on the definitions of the original words, which I've spent quite a bit of time doing. I've probably done
Sure.
that with 700-800 verses, probably 100 or more passages, and so it has. It's I wouldn't characterize it um, as a hobby. It's more like back to this whole interest thing that we've talked about so many times. Wow, I wonder if the translators have if they've given a reasonable interpretation of this.
Hmm.
And so it's more of that inquisitive, interesting what's going on here. Because I think I may have mentioned to you also that, it's probably been in the early 90s that the Lord began to point me to the Bible and say, "Oh, is that what that says?
Hmm.
Is that really what that says?" Um, well, I don't know. That's what's written there. And they'll say, "Well, do you think that's an accurate rendering of what's written?" Well, how do I know?
Right.
And what I got out of that is that, in my mind, and I think it's safe to say in virtually every Christian environment I've been in, that when I was taught that the Bible was the inerrant, infallible Word of God, that included the translation.
Yeah.
Well, from a strategic standpoint, if you were my foe, what would you do with that, perspective?
Yep.
And so, anyway, Joe, not wanting to get off topic, but Joe, is aware of what I've done in that, and so he sent this verse and said, "Hey, man, do you have anything about this one about what this verse is actually saying from the rendering of the definitions of the words, original words?" So I'm going to be fascinated to see if he brings that today, because if he did, that'll blow your mind.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, and I, you know what, I think it's worth, you know, providing this, you know, tool or process to folks. So I asked you long before we started all this stuff, hey, what do you use? What are the tools that you use to look into these things? So if I can just articulate it back. So what you've been doing is you're saying, okay, let's take a look as best we can into the origins of the words in their original writing. So there's,
Yes,
you know, for the most part, you would say Old Testament Hebrew, New Testament Greek. Is that right?
yes, yes.
Sorry, my daughter's chiming in.
No,
Okay, so
chime
the
in, daughter.
tools, yeah, the tools that you use. So you turned me on to, um, you know, I'm gonna just pull this up here because I think this is actually, you know, teaching people to fish here, right? You've taught me to
Yep.
fish. Let's teach some people to fish. And this is one tool that I think could be helpful to you if you're somebody that's interested, like Steve and I are, and you want to drill into these things. And not that I'm taking the translations as everything suspect, but I think that it's this curiosity going, hey, let's examine the truth and let's probe the truth and let's do everything we can to probe it as much as we can. And so here's an example. So this is Bible Hub, BibleHub.com. And so you can take, if you look at actually and I don't know if you can see this here, um, but you can go into the link and you can use it, or you got a drop down. But what this does is, if you look towards the bottom, you can click on the Greek, for example, in this, and this will show, more detail. Do you want to kind of describe what this does when you look at it in the Greek, for example, or the Hebrew?
Yeah, this is a great tool, and um, it is part of the positive side of technology
Yeah.
and the development, and it's also a really important part of where we are in our time, because there is a lot of noise. You use the word noise quite often in your
Yep.
streams. There is a ton of noise out there. So how do you penetrate the noise? Well, there's religious noise, there's financial noise, there's political noise, there's educational. I mean, it's everywhere. So and in particular with the Hamas deal going on, there are all kinds of people who are within the Christian realm that are heavily interested in end time Bible prophecy, is what they call it, and it's 100% based on what the Bible says, and then the interpretation of that by the commentators or the viewers of that interpretation. And like all of us, there is then an assumption that that is true. Well, what happens if the translation is not a reasonably accurate representation of what the original words say?
Yep.
Then what do you do? Well, what you have in its simplest form at that point is you have the very nature of deception and misdirection. And I'm describing a little bit of my own background and path. I'm going to move again because Mr. Sunshine is kind of popping in. Uh, that was actually the part of my journey.
Yeah.
Was the Lord saying, because let me tell you, I had the end time Bible stuff down, at least in my own mind.
Yep.
And then what I would come to a conclusion and be a promoter of that, and then Jesus would ask me a question. Well, what about this? And it was, and I'll give you a little example of that leads into all of this, leads into your question. I had spent a tremendous amount of time on what the more fundamental sides of the Christian uh, church says with regard to um, tribulation, end time, the second coming of Christ, things of that nature. And so I did a tremendous amount of study. And when I did that, I came to a conclusion, and I said to the Lord, I said, wow, thank you for that. Man, I think I got it now. And of course that declaration kind of tells you everything you need to know,
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
how the human mind thinks, in particular mine, at that time. And so he said, oh yeah, that's great. I'm glad you got that down. And he said, now, what do you think about the millennium? And Matt, I didn't even know what the millennium was. I said, what do you mean the millennium? And so I had to go through an entire process of learning. And once I started dealing with that, I saw how one of the strategic approaches is to get us so narrowly focused on something that we think we grasp it. And in reality, what's happening is we're just being led down a particular path that has nothing to do with what is true, while we will die for what we think is true. All right. So what that began was a process of looking more carefully at what the Bible renderings would be. And so I'd have, you know, 3 or 4 translations. I mean, when I sat down and studied, I would have, 10 books around me. All right. And I would have to go from one book to the next book to the next book to the next book because I'm one of these guys that I'm not just interested in knowing a little bit about something. If I have interest in it, I'm going to dig in and really find out what this is about. Well, what the Bible Hub has done is it has taken all of those resources of where I would have to sit down and have 10 or 12 or 15 books around to try to sort all this stuff out. It's put it into one easily accessible app. And so if you go back to it, you can see, like, if you scroll up a little bit up to the top.
Here, I'm gonna go
Okay.
to the actual homepage here because I think this is a better place to start. So this is BibleHub.com.
Yep.
Go ahead.
And so what you want to do, this is what it looks like when you first get it. And so if you go up to Hebrews on the Genesis arrow, no, Genesis arrow, we'll look at your verse first.
Oh, up here, you mean? Okay.
Yes,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
yep, okay. Click down, do the down, click on that and it'll bring, there you go, the Hebrews, then go to your verse. And there's a drop down box that'll take you right down to the very verse itself. Well, okay, here you see the verse, okay, or you see the chapter, and you can get to the verse. Now scroll back up. Now here, what you see, go ahead and scroll down. Here, what you'll see is you'll see this verse in all of these various translations.
Yep. Yep.
Now, what I saw you did is you quoted the NIV.
I did.
Okay, so there you have the NIV, or you can look at the New Living Translation or the English Standard or the Berean Standard, Berean Literal, King James. So you see, you have all of these translations. Now, one of the things that you'll discover when you look at this is how that the King James version is actually the mother translation for virtually every other translation. They are very, very similar with few exceptions. I'm playing with the sun again.
Yep. And then what I've done, and you've kind of taught me to do, is hey, once I find this spot, and this is how I use the tool, is I'll go to the verse in question, and I'll click on this button right here that says Greek.
Mm-hmm.
And what that will do is it will take, above it'll say, all right, and this breaks it down to the individual words.
Yeah.
And so, all right, so what did the translator, what is the actual Greek word?
Yeah.
What kind of word is it? In this case, a verb. Okay. And I think what's really cool about this is the Strongs. You want to kind of talk about that as far as all of the descriptions of the specific words, because obviously I don't read Greek. Talk about that.
Okay. So Strong's was the first concordance that took every word and then gave in every original word, gave a translation for that, a brief translation or definition of that word, and then associated the English word to it. So let's say you had the King James Version, it would take every word in the King James, then connect the original Greek word or Hebrew word that that word was used to translate, and then give the definitions. So here you see in what you're describing in this particular part of the app, see to it that, and you see that what it is, that's um, the Greek word. It's a verb, present imperative active, second person, and there's all kinds of these things that most people aren't interested in. And then it's primary physical. I look, see, perceive, discern. Um, a primary verb to look at. And so you look at this and you say to look at it, to see, perceive, discern. Well, doggone, right off the bat, see
Yeah.
to it that I say, is that an acceptable rendering? Is that a fair rendering of that verb?
Yeah.
And it's like, no, that verb has way more meaning than see to it that. I mean, that looks like a command uh, that, you know, puts you in a position as opposed to something that's saying, look at what you need to do is really look at this thing, stare at it, discern, perceive, see what this is all about. So it gives a much deeper meaning of what's going on. So then the Strongs, now you can click on Strongs. That's the number. And then it'll take you to Strongs where it'll give you a number of verses where that word exists, and then how King James Version and others translate it in that verse. Now I'm gonna show you another way to use this app. So if you go back, so scroll up
Where
and
to?
and just go back. Okay, there you go. Just continue to scroll up.
Okay.
And now look up here in the bar where it says Greek.
Right
See,
here.
yeah,
Yep.
hit that.
Okay.
Okay. Now, here you have a different view of all of that. And what you have is on the left column, you have that number. Remember, the Strong's 991. There
Mm-hmm.
it is. Now you have the Greek word. This is the blipe. Okay. Here's an simple English translation. Take heed. And then on the right um, is what those abbreviations mean. So V, for example, is verb. Um, then you have the PMA, which are different kinds of elements and cases of the verb. And then you have second person plural. All right, so now go back to 991 Strong's and click on that again. Okay, here that gives a little different look at the Strong's. And here you have the word, so you have to look at. Okay, so blepo is to look at. It's the original word. It's a verb. The phonetic spelling, so you can kind of get a feel for what the word, how to pronounce it. The definition to look at, and the usage is primarily physical. So you're looking at physical things. See, there is an evidence of something that you can look at. Now here, it gives you help word studies is another form where it takes the um, the Strong's numerical system, and then it gives an expanded definition and feel for what that word means. So, blepo, properly to see, be observant and watchful, suggests to see something physical with spiritual results, spiritual perception. That is, it carries what is seen into the non-physical immaterial realm so a person can take the needed action. That's exactly the word that Jesus was using with the disciples when they came out, that we've talked about in previous sessions about coming out of the temple and trying to build a case that the temple complex was a suitable place for God to dwell. And Jesus says, man, don't you see with your physical eyes into the spiritual realm so that you can take the needed action? That's the word. Well, the translation doesn't give anything close to that kind of a perspective when it comes to what Jesus was saying. It's completely sterilized. Well, Once it's sterilized, then you say, well, why is it sterilized? What what is the what is what good does that do? Okay? And so then it starts leading to other questions. So within that one single app, you can go to translations, you can go to the various translations, you can go to individual words, you can go into commentaries about that translation, that verse. It has like half a dozen really great sub apps to it that you can go as deep as you want into virtually any subject. And it's right on your phone or on your desktop or on your laptop or on your tablet.
Okay. So that tool is BibleHub.com. So let me let me push back on something, right?
Sure.
Right. And one of the terms that you used, I'm gonna play my best Steve Staggs here. You use the term sterilized. Okay.
Yeah.
And I would say what comes with the word sterilized? Intentionality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so one of the things I'm somewhat cautious on is, am I going to these translations with the assumption that that I am being intentionally fooled? So on one hand, you could, right? You could
Yep.
really go into these things going, everything I read, I'm going to check because I've seen that I'm intentionally going to be fooled. This is a sterilized version of the truth. You've seen evidence for that.
Yeah.
Um, there seems to be somewhat of a balance between, this idea of discernment, right? You have these tools now. You had all these books, and now you've got this tool. And obviously, because of your interest and your desire to investigate these things fully, you drive yourself into it. What's interesting to me, like when I think of this word, for example, here, when I look at the word, um, what is this? Blepo? Is
Yeah.
that a
Blepo.
prop? Blepo? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What I see in this versus approaching it as, man, look at how they've deceived us. I'm looking at this and I'm going, wow, how rich this is and how
Yeah.
deep this is. So my approach is not one of being suspect of the translators, although you may convince me that I should be.
Yeah.
What I'm like more in love with the fact that there is this depth of understanding, right? Because I think about how we engage, right? You and me, we
Yeah.
jump on the stream, we're like, "What's up, buddy?" And we're chatting it up and all these things. And you tell me a story about the the prodigal son, and we talk about things. We rarely are quoting a translation.
Yeah.
You're telling me the story. You're just like, "Hey, have you thought about this, Matt?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that is crazy." Now, some of that might come from your study,
Yeah.
but then also there are times when I listen back to this stuff, especially when I'm driving to transport children, and I'll listen to this stuff back, and something that I did not remember saying or you saying hits me.
Yeah.
And this seems to be the mystery of all of this. And I think this is what I kind of want to expand on is that my general approach isn't like, well, at every turn I'm being fooled. I'm looking at this with almost reverence, going, I am so thankful that Steve came along to show me a way in which I can do this research on my own and experience the fullness and richness and depth of one, the tools, but what it actually means. And so when I look at this and it says, um, that is, it carries what is seen into the non-physical immaterial realm so a person can take needed action. I'm like, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. My first thought though isn't, man, those guys fooled me.
Right.
So that's my pushback. What do you say?
Yeah. 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 Good pushback. Um, there are typically in most issues there when you're looking at them it doesn't have one side or dimension to it,
Right.
and so um, in attempting to describe both elements of it, there is what I have shared with you as a result of the why question, because you're exactly right. When you look into those words, you go, whoa, How powerful is that? And then, okay, did they give an accurate rendering of that? And wait a minute, why did they say that? Why did they say it that way? Why? And so, speaking for myself, I didn't approach it from a negative point of view.
Okay.
I began with the fundamental premise that the translations gave an accurate account of what the original words were. And in that time, I declared that the scriptures were inerrant and infallible, and I included in that the translations.
Okay.
So
And
that was my state of mind.
that's huge.
Okay.
That's huge.
Okay? So that's where I started. Then once the Lord started taking me deeper into it, it was again his typical way, at least with me, was, Steve, what do you think about that? Steve, is that actually there? Is that what that is actually saying? And I can point to the early things that he pointed to, that at the time it took me years to try to sort through all of that. Quite frankly, three little things that he pointed to took me years to get to really my all the stuff stripped out of my brain to be able to understand it. And then as a result of that process, it was, hey, wait a minute. Once, twice, three times, okay, 700 times you've rendered something that was of critical importance, that stripped it down to the point where either you totally redirected the meaning or hid the message, or wait a minute, what's going on here? Something is not right. So that was the second phase, or excuse me, the third phase. And then the fourth was when, during my particular time of training, was looking at things strategically. Steve, activity apart from important strategic purpose is merely busy work. Do you think they're just trying to be busy? Oh, wow. Jesus, are you saying there's a strategic intention in play? Well, Steve, what do you think? Okay, and now it's like, okay, so what would that be? Well, then it takes you
Yeah.
a step deeper in it.
Yep.
So I'm exactly. I mean, I love the pushback
Yeah.
because it's not entering it from a standpoint of trying to prove something wrong. It's actually from the standpoint of wanting to know the deep richness,
Yeah.
and then eventually coming to the point, well, wait a minute, if I can figure this out, why can't these folks figure it out? If I can write this down, why can't they write it down? So that's kind of where it went.
You know what's so cool about this too is that, as we work these things out, there's a lot in this process. I mean, we're modeling it right here, right?
Yep.
I'm just a young whippersnapper, right? And here you are the old sage, right? And what's interesting about it is, what are we working?
Old maybe.
Yeah. What are we working out?
Yeah.
We're working out this. You're passing something on to me, and you're
Yes.
saying, "Hey, this is a process and something." And I think what's so cool about it is, because I do want you to point out an example, because I know that you've got a number of them, but as an example of something that potentially was intentionally neutered. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important to highlight that. So I'd love for you to do that next. But what I do want to say is the beauty of this journey of being conformed into his likeness, is it's a beautiful thing, because that it stands up to this probing.
Yes.
And of course, you said it many times, and I've seen the practical output of it, which is, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
And I think, that's where we talk about, like, being in the game. Not everybody. I was telling you privately yesterday, man, there's a lot of people who aren't really interested in being in the game, man. like
Yeah, that's
like no interest whatsoever.
yeah,
And you go, okay, well then why is it that God designed you to listen to the stream? Why did He design you to take the time out to talk to me? Why has He given me a heart and a mind to be interested in the edges and details and depth of this? And what is the purpose of that? Because you're right, all of it is strategic. And when you start thinking about the fact that we've been created uniquely and that this is like custom tailored for us, and that He's designed Steve Staggs the way He's designed Steve Staggs, and that has value
yeah,
not only for you in life and godliness and all of the things in your own life, but also as you share these things with me and we share with others. And it's so neat that it's almost like the things that need to stick as we throw the spaghetti against the wall, they stick. They
yeah,
stick where they're supposed to stick.
yeah,
And so I just love it's ambiguity in some respects, but it has a structure to it that I appreciate. So give us an example. What are some of the things that you had this, over time had this aha that said, "Hold on a second." You mentioned to me just the concept of the church and the government being one at the time of the writing of the King James. That was one thing that just kind of was like, "Oh yeah, I hadn't really thought about that." Can you give us an example?
yeah, sure. And I'll give you the examples, and then briefly, and then if you want to go into the history, like what you're talking about, that's what you find out. All of these flow out of um, an interest that facilitates and births curiosity. If you're interested in something, what happens is you want to know more about it, or you want to get better at
Yeah.
it, or you want to tell others about it. In my business consulting days, when I would go in and help, marketing and sales, parts of companies and stuff like that. Um, I would talk about, recall and interest, and how you get people interested in things. And one of the elements was that we would talk about is promote value that swallows up consideration for cost, and not try to predefine what the value is, because each person has their own value.
Right.
And so be a good listener. You serve to sell. And so if you serve their interests and you promote value that swallows up consideration for cost, not only will they do business with you the first time, they'll beg to do business with you the next 100 times.
Amen.
And so there is a very practical element you know, to this curiosity and interest in another situation that draws you into not only helping but serving. So what I would talk to them about as another example of this is what I would call the movie model of marketing. The movie model of marketing, they'll promote a small amount, invest relatively small amount of money to get the public to know, but then what they depend upon is for the viewing audience to go tell others that, hey man, you need to go see this movie. This is the bomb. Well, that's kind of what I'm doing in this kind of a situation. Is I'm telling you, man, I've found some things that are really worth looking into. And so if you're interested, look into it too, because if you have anything like my experience, man, you keep coming back for episode 2, 3, 4, 5, 5,000, and
Yeah.
you'll never get bored. Well, that's kind of what this is. So
So this is the
that,
movie trailer version here, Steve?
yeah, these are all movie trailer versions. That's exactly right. So in this particular trailer, the first one that the Lord pointed me to was in, I think it was 1 Corinthians 12 or 13, uh, uh, concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware. Is that 13:1 or
I want to pull it up
12:1?
here.
Maybe 12:1.
All right, 12:1. Let me pull it up. 1 Corinthians 12:1. Concerning now spiritual. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah. Concerning spiritual gifts, gifts, brothers or brethren, I do not want you to be unaware. Well, the very first thing, if you'll notice, and I don't know which one you're looking at, but gifts may be in italics.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull it up here once I get it
Okay.
pulled up. Okay, here we go. Hang on one second. I had to get it set. Okay, here we go.
Okay. Now about the gifts of the Spirit, brothers, I do not want you to be uninformed. Okay. Now the version that I was my primary version, if you scroll down, was, and you can see there in King James,
Yep.
gifts is in italics. You look at New American Standard, gifts is in italics.
Yep.
See, not everyone puts it in italics. Mine was a NASB 77, so gifts was in italics. And so, I just accepted that. And so when you read now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware. That sets a perspective, a mindset in place. And by the way, I talk about this dynamic in that little article I've written about on communication. Kind of tells you how this whole thing works and why it works this way. Well, I just accepted that we're not going to be talking about spiritual gifts. And then one day I was looking at that and I go, wow, what about this spiritual gifts? And what is Paul talking about? And I thought, that's kind of interesting. He's talking about spiritual gifts, and then he talks about them being pagans. That while you were pagans, you were essentially bowing down to rocks and, praying to pieces of wood. And I thought, well, wait a minute, what do spiritual gifts have to do with that? So a question started coming in. And then Jesus says, why do you think that's in italics?
Hmm.
I don't know. Why is it in italics? He says, what? Do you think it might be important to find out why the word's in italics? And I thought, gosh, I suppose so. I mean, if you're saying that, I better say yeah.
Yeah.
To pass the test, I better say yes.
Yep.
And so I looked in there, and guess what? When the word is in italics, it's because it's not there. It is a
Wow.
translator's insertion. And so it was like, whoa, wait a minute. Why would they insert the word gifts in there? And so he said, well, why don't you find out what that verse actually says? So I get into my Bible, back in the days of all of these books, and I break out the Vines and the Strongs and all of these various things, and come to find out the word spiritual is an adjective,
Yes. Wow.
and it actually means spiritualities. So if you were to translate that into the English, you would say spiritual ones or spiritualities.
So
So
now about spiritual brothers. Interesting. Wow.
so it would read, now concerning the spiritual ones, brothers, or
Yeah.
the spiritualities, brethren, I don't want you to be unaware. For when you were pagans, now all of a sudden that second sentence makes total sense, because he's not talking about spiritual gifts. He's talking about spiritual entities that are so shrewd in what they do, they can get you to bow down before rocks. Okay? You know that when you were pagans, you were led. Okay? Now we got that little were in there. Nah, you wasn't that you were, that when you're a pagan, you are being led
Wow.
astray to the dumb idols, however you were led. So what Paul was talking to them is, I don't want you to be unaware, folks, of how shrewd these spiritual beings are, these spiritualities are, because they can get you to bow down to a dumb idol, to a rock, to a piece of wood, And they've got a billion ways to do that. And then it's like, okay, Lord, you are opening something up to me. Wow. Uh, does that describe me? Am I being led?
Wow.
Well, Steve, what's happening? How are you approaching your Bible there? Do you see how it led you right then and there? It made you think it was talking about spiritual gifts. It wasn't talking about spiritual gifts. Paul was talking about spiritual beings and how they can lead you astray and how they can cause you to think one thing is true when another is true. And they will get you to do things that if another person was looking at you, they would say, what the heck is that dude doing? Why is he bound down to a rock? What do you think that rock is going to do?
Do you think the translators intentionally inserted that to distract or to deceive, or do you think it was an honest mistake?
Well, now that question now gets you into the strategic
Yeah.
purpose. Okay, Jesus, why did they do this? What is the strategic purpose to this? Now, yesterday you were talking about, you were really connecting on the layers,
Yeah. Yeah.
stepping back
Yeah.
layer one, oh, stepping back layer two, stepping back layer three. Whoa, all of a sudden I'm getting the whole spiritual landscape in front of me if I step back with Jesus far enough to see what's actually happening. And so you have the answer to the question is you have a physical translator being led by a spiritual being. And the spiritual being, that's exactly what that verse says, by the way,
Yeah.
about the spiritualities. These spiritualities are so shrewd, they can get you to think that you are actually following God. And they'll get you to do the craziest daggone things and make you think that that's exactly what's right. I don't want you to be unaware, folks, of how this works. Be aware of how it works. So you have in the macro sense, you have a spiritual being of darkness attempting to manipulate and lead and people who would give themselves to the Bible, thinking that it is the inerrant, you know, infallible Word of God. Well, once you look at that and you say, well, I did. You dirty rats, why did you do that? And then Jesus says, well, if you were them, what would you do?
Mhm.
Oh, I'd do exactly the same thing. If they gave themselves to it, then I would strategically manipulate the words to mean one thing, that the words that are meant to mean one thing, to redefine them to mean another thing, so that I can lead them where I need them to be. Wow. Okay. Lord, you're just blowing my mind. Well, Steve, you want to be in the game?
Wow.
I do want to be in the game. Well, then take note.
Yep.
Okay? This is how it works. If you want to be in the game, you have to take courage to actually see how the game is played. And it's going to wreck you for a while.
Yeah, it is.
Are you willing to be wrecked in order to come into what is true? Well, Jesus, I don't know. I'll tell you later. For right now, I'm going to say yes. I reserve the right to change my
Right,
mind.
right. Well, the implications of what you're saying is tremendous, right? And it has far-reaching implications, right? So you think about, and this is the thing I think that wrecks me the most about this is if you are someone who is, let's say you're advocating for the English translation to be inerrant, and I've heard people talk about that, but I've often also heard people say, "Hey, we're recognizing this in its original form." It's in original form and intent. And that's what you're drilling into, right? You're saying, hey, the best that we can possibly do, let's understand this. And, I appreciate the fact that it's in italics in many cases, right? I do
Yeah.
appreciate that because it does make you go, why is this in italics? Let's look at this. But I would say that the average, preacher in Christendom is not drilling in on these things to point them out. But what I think is what is huge here is you often talk about the usual suspects, and because we're talking about movies and trailers, this Kobayashi thing is, the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince people he didn't exist.
Yeah.
And of course, most people I would say, yeah, that's a bunch of religious hokiness. And what we're basically saying is, well, if someone is that crafty and would use every possible means, and to think that Satan himself is a beautiful angel and a musician, which is
Yeah.
a whole other thing, is that this beauty and then of course, what does Satan offer? Right? You think about this power and you think about the things that are insatiable desires, right? To lead you astray, that they would be attractive and appetizing and seem to be really good. And so, well, what is the Bible? What is the translations of the Bible? And when you think about it, you go, hold on a second. And it's really interesting to think that what we really gross general way would say is good, right? Put your hand on the good book,
Yeah.
brother, is to say, hold on, could this be actually used as a tool of distraction? And, when you think about all of the implications of that, I mentioned to you my church itself saying, hey, you need to come under the authority of the Bible. And I'm like, whoa, man, hang on a second. I mean, you just hammered it. And I'm like, not a conversation at all about coming under the authority of the living Jesus. Now, if I had pressed him on it, I'd be like, of course.
Yeah.
But it's interesting when you see this nuance, but it's really it's interesting. It takes me back to that agricultural story.
Yeah.
Pushing back from the lake, he tells the story, and I'm sure there was a group of people who were like got their heads cocked kind of weird going, "What did he
Yeah.
mean by that?" And everybody else is like, "That's great. Thanks so much. We're going home." And then these guys run after him like, "Hold on a second. Something's up here. This has got to be more to this than that." And that's us, right? The
Yeah.
ecclesia. These are the called out ones. Well, Steve, it's come that time. If you can believe, we've gone through an hour already.
Yeah. We kind of blow through this stuff, don't we?
Well, it was just fun because this was like literally inspired just from I think it was really cool. We did not plan on talking about this, which is my favorite part of
Yeah.
this whole thing.
Yeah.
But you have invited a longtime friend of yours. Do you want to give us a little preview of our guest today?
Sure. This is my friend Joe Cotton. He is my second longest friend. I've known him since about 1984, maybe 85, somewhere in that range. Man, we traveled a lot of ground together. He is one of those guys that has been unafraid, though sometimes wondering what the heck he's getting himself into. He has been unafraid to, and I'm going to use the analogy with Peter and Jesus. He's been unafraid to step out of the boat and at least examine something. Um, he's been a precious friend, and you and I had talked about, hey, what do you think? It'd be worthwhile for bring somebody in who's actually, traveled the journey a little bit and, can give a different point of view and a different perspective other than yours and mine, Matt.
Yep.
And so this is my dear friend, Joe. And Joe, welcome to Crypto Heartbeat.
Yeah. So it would not be a crypto heartbeat stream unless you did the proper introduction. And I would say, at first when I met Joe, we talked yesterday and kind of got a little preview of all this stuff, and he kind of said, I'm just a regular guy. And I thought, well, he's the regular Joe. But then I didn't put two and two together because he's really actually Cotton Eye Joe. What is up, Joe? Good to
Hey,
see
hi
you.
guys. How you doing?
Welcome.
It's fun to be here. It's
Yeah, thanks so much for
cool, a
being
little
here.
bit different.
Yeah, well, you know what I think is so cool about having you here, and I think Steve's sensitivity said, "Hey, maybe we should bring somebody in." Tell us, you've been journeying with Steve as a friend, and I'm really curious. What's that experience been like? Right, you got somebody who is in this process of drilling deeply into this stuff, and tell us about that because you've seen way more of this process than I have.
Well, as Steve mentioned, we became friends or came in contact with each other mid-'80s. I actually met Steve in a Sunday school class of a conservative denomination church, and sat through some church services and Sunday school classes, and then we decided our families would get together. I think originally I was enthralled by the fact that he was a ex-professional baseball player, and I considered myself somewhat of a athlete, so I wanted to hobnob with him. So we struck up a friendship. Our families got together. Um, we started playing cards, get together for card night, and as I shared with you, uh, by the third game of Pinochle, the cards were on the table, and we were all just leaning in, and I knew that God had started something special. He brought somebody special into my life. He didn't tell me to listen to him, but I knew, like he did you, but I knew that I wanted and needed to listen to him.
Wow. Well, we got something in common, Joe. Well, let me ask you this. What you said this was what, 84? Does that sound right?
84, 85.
84, 85. Okay. Um, yeah, I don't know exactly what I was doing that year, but I think I was actually watching the Detroit Tigers win the World Series in 84 is what I think I was doing. Am I right, Steve?
Important stuff. Yes.
Yeah.
You were focusing on the important stuff.
That's right. Right. Who was the one that hit that walk-off home run? What was it? Forget the Tiger. I'll remember here in a second. So Joe, I think the thing that I think is really interesting about this story is, I realized over the last year, just spending time with Steve, a constant recurring theme. And of course, I've articulated that every single time we've met here as Jesus is alive and he speaks. And it seems so like, well, yeah, of course he's alive and he speaks. But when you start actually expressing that and seeing that, well, we might say that on Easter Sunday, right? He is risen. But I don't see that in a practical way being played out. I see something very different being promoted. And it really struck me when Steve talked to me about the past, the present, and the future. And what kind of, I guess, wrecked me and made me realize, hold on a second, this is a rabbit hole worth going down. And this is one in which, hold on a second, it changes everything. If Jesus isn't hiding the ball, right? Because the way it's been presented to me in my kind of education has been that Jesus is mystical and mysterious and distant and potentially dead, right? And he's but when you start looking at this and all of the things that came out of this, no, this is a living Jesus who speaks. And how almost like really treating that seriously seems almost like the most purest form of the gospel, but almost offensive to those when you follow it. What has been your experience?
You know what? I told you yesterday I have a little bit of an advantage on you because I have gotten to know you for 50 hours so far. and so much of what you say mirrors my journey, my thought process, where I have been and where I've come from. So a few years before I met Steve, I had totally given my life to Christ. I jumped in, and what that meant at the time was you got involved in the brick and mortar church, and you got involved at every level. And I taught Sunday school classes, and I was on the deacon board, and I was there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Monday night visitation. We were hosting families, reaching out, and we did it for years. We did it for years, and I loved the people. I loved what I'd learned, all that stuff, but I was tired. It was sucking the life out of me. And I meet this guy who leads me to saying, church isn't meant to be all of those things. It's meant to be a 24/7 experience with Jesus where you wake up in the morning and you say, Father, hey, where are you working out today? Where are we going? What are we doing? Who are we going to interact with? just like Jesus said, I do nothing apart. You guys have discussed it many times. I do nothing unless my Father tells me to do it. And I go where I see him working. Man, that is a whole lot easier than all of that other stuff that we did. So, and it didn't come easy. It didn't come easy when you are so bound and enslaved by the system. Okay, and I love the church. I mean, we're having church right here, right now. Uh, I love the church and I love the people, and I have so many great friends, but it was exhausting, and it took me years uh, of interacting with Steve and interacting with God, and him showing me in his own way, because there's only one Staggs.
Yeah.
And Matt, you shouldn't try to be like him, and I shouldn't try to be like him, but we should listen to the message and then ask God ourselves. But when I got free, I knew the second that I was freed up from the established church and free to walk and do what it is God calls me to do on a daily basis. And it felt good.
Hmm. Wow. Well, it's interesting, this idea of being free from something. Um, I've often felt like in decision making, right? In situations in which it's serious. And the decisions that aren't serious, and then the ones that are really serious, and you're like, okay, I need some help with this one. And it feels like when you're free, when you're free of this kind of shackles, I mean, you're right. It feels in a way like I feel really obligated to this thing. And one of the things that I've done in the past is looked at the church as a country club, right? And if I think of it like a country club, I go, well, yeah, I like hanging out with people, right? I like having relationships with people. And I think about, boot camp in such a way of saying, I'm really thankful for my introduction and people that brought me into the church. I really am. There's some people who literally, they loved me and said, hey, I can see that you're suffering. Come on along here. And it really actually fulfilled a really great purpose. What I love about it, though, is the depth is way beyond the country club. And I think, there's what you're expressing is this maturity that goes on with everything from, diving deeply into things, but also the discernment that comes from, hey, Jesus is alive and he speaks. And, my decision making process now is one of, hey, what do you think about this? And there's this sense of peace and no peace. There's an interesting, like, there, it becomes very clear rather than I have to get some audible, direction. It's more saying, all right, those that are around me. I mean, you even said this about moving, right? And you're like, I'm not telling my wife, which would be a cool story to hear about. But I guess that's what's so neat about all this is that we constantly are being encouraged by Steve. And this is what I love about it, because I think you can get to the point where someone is so special and you're like, well, look at Steve. And every time I've kind of been in that, like, do I have to be like Steve? Steve's always said to me, hey, why don't you ask him yourself? Because this is you and him. There's no intermediaries. What are your thoughts on that, on Joe? Is that your experience as
Oh,
well?
absolutely, absolutely. Steve has never come to me and said, "Hey, the Lord told me that you need to do this
Yeah.
or you need to pay attention to this." He just has these. I call them stagisms, these little golden nuggets that he comes up with, like the 24/7 thing. And it is so simple. Jesus said, "My yoke is simple." You know, we don't have to make it hard. The Jews had 613 laws they had to abide by to be right with God. And the church has just about as many today that we have to wait. It's a system just like that that's been built. Uh, but Steve has just all along has just said so many things. My wife and I all the time talk when we look at something and trying to decide if we're to be involved. My wife is really good about saying, is the nature and character of Jesus reside in this? Can we look at it and see the nature and character of Christ? And sometimes she's my whetstone, you know, she's
Yeah.
sharpening me because she has a sharp eye for that. So that aspect of it has really touched her. Steve, one of the things he told me long ago was, he goes, you don't throw everything out when you hear somebody interacting, when you're listening to a message, don't throw it all out. He said, everybody is a treasure or a treasure chest. And he said, it's your job to find the key that unlocks the treasure.
Ooh.
And I remind him of that one all the time, that and so when I look at people and somebody is dogging another person or saying, oh, that person's no good, man, I'm sitting there saying, but there's a treasure in there that we just have to find the way to unlock it. And
Oh my
I told you, God gave me my dream. I thought that to minister for Christ, I had to go to work at a church and get paid for it. And I just could not shake that. You know, I needed to go to Bible college. I need to get an education, and I need to serve him in the church. And there came a time in the last 40 years that God gave me that dream. And so I was able to become a pastor on a staff, and I was more of a small group people pastor. I wasn't a pulpit pastor. And he gave that to me and let me live it for about 8 years, until really in my heart, I felt like this isn't what I signed up for. And I recognized the business that it was, and how much time and energy was put on the business of maintaining the bricks and mortar and the different programs, and a lot of them did really good things. You know, you feed hungry people, there's some really great things that went on, but it was a business. And the Lord called me out of it. He said, I want you to go back to school at 37 years old. He said, I want you to go back to school. I want you to get your education degree, and I want you to teach. And in this small community we're in, I went back. I went to school evenings and weekends, and spent 3 years getting my teaching certificate. And he placed me in a 4th grade classroom, Mr. Cotton. And I got to teach for the next 25 years. I got to teach 100 different kids every day. I got to coach as many every day for 25 years. And that, he showed me, was my ministry, that it wasn't bricks and mortar where you ministered. It was every day in that 4th grade class, when the kids would come in and hug me and sit on my lap and want to tell me what was going on at home. Man, that was ministry. Or today I had a closing on a house, and I'm sitting at the title company before I came here, and a young couple walks in, and I wasn't paying a lot of attention. I was waiting on some paperwork, and I heard what they said, and they were buying another house that was closing this afternoon. And it was one of my ex-students from 4th grade, 25 years ago, was sitting across from me with long hair and a goatee, and I could see through the hair that it was him. And we just had the most wonderful conversation. But he is one of those kids that God had me minister to over that 25 years. Ministry is 24/7, every day. Lord, where do you want me to go? What do you want me to do?
Wow. So, Steve, I want to ask you about this because you mentioned that you had spoken to him about people having a treasure in them, and I share that with you. Would you explain and express what that really means when you say everyone has a treasure in them?
Well, yeah, it's so much a part of, what we talk about in the upside down world. We are taught in the upside down world to find difference for the purpose of conforming the other party to our perspective on something. And what that does is it creates a caste system in relationships where you're looking at somebody with what I would call a cross eye.
Yeah.
You're already looking for what's wrong with them instead of what's right with them. And And the reality is that every single person has been given a divine mission before time ever began, and they will accomplish that mission. That's not in question. The only question is, will they accomplish it with Jesus, or will they accomplish it in opposition to Jesus? Which then obviously affects who they are. So in every single person, there is a deposit of God's own person in them. And if you can unlock that, if you can get past looking at their fault or what's wrong or how they say things the way you wouldn't say it, or they believe in ways that you don't believe, which by the way, the church is could probably learn a few things in this, right? Is that no, we're not here to conform people to our perspectives. What we are here to do, at least in part, is to help them come into the fullness of what they were put on the planet to do. And that's the treasure that's in them. And if you unlock it, guess who gets to be the beneficiary of that? Not only them, but everybody they touch.
Yeah.
And so Joe's in it is describing how that worked. And now in his life, it's through being able to influence and affect hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of young people throughout a 25-year career teaching young kids. Well, who could come up with that plan?
Yep.
It wasn't in Joe's mind. He wasn't thinking about it.
Yeah.
But he was listening.
You know, it's really cool. So Ray and I, my oldest friend, if you will, for the last 20 years, we've been having this conversation about who do we want to be, right? God, who do you want us to be? And, there's always these kind of pictures and metaphors and experiences that you have that are kind of a ideal picture of what it is. My camera is locking up on me here, so bear with me. And one of the things that I remember as a young kid is in my grandfather, probably wasn't the most gentle person around, but he was one of these guys that had real soft hands, because he hadn't worked for a long time. And of course, he was a sales guy, so he didn't ever really do the manual labor. But when I was a little kid, he would kind of go, "Hey, come here, kid." And he was born in 1911. And you'd be a little kid kind of walking over, and he'd grab your hand, and it was real soft, and he'd pull you in, and he'd kind of get in your ear, and he'd be like, "Hey, how you doing?" And what's interesting is I use that example of who do I want to be, right? And I think about you guys, and I'm like, you got grandkids, and this obviously there's this joy of saying, think of how many kids, fourth grade kids, came through that classroom, and on those fields and all those things. And I think about this community that we're in right now, and I see the nature of what's happened with men and families, and really this relationship often that people have of who God is as it relates to their experience with their own father. And of course, my dad passing, very dramatic, and still I think about him all the time. And I think about, all right, and I'm reminded of all the ways in which he modeled that, right? That he was really actually interested in you. And that's probably one of the things I miss the most is no matter what it was, is having a conversation with my dad, he was actually interested in what I had to say. Yeah. And of course, in that unspokenness was like, hey, you're valuable. And there's something in what you're talking about, Steve and Joe, that I feel like is who I want to be. Right. I want to be someone who is seeing the best in people, regardless of what they're expressing. And in many cases, people are making it very clear how hurting they are. And to me, I go to these, crypto meetups, right? And we got this cool community, but it's almost like we're all a bunch of kids looking around going, is anyone going to see me? And it's amazing. These guys are, my age or older, who have tremendous amounts of money, are still young boys going, hey, daddy, what do I matter? How do you see that? What are your thoughts there? Because I think that is something so powerful beyond drilling down into the word in the Greek. There's something there that is so powerful.
It's all simple. one of the themes that you guys keep hitting on is this is really simple.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Right.
It's not easy. It's simple. You asked me yesterday about friends, as I've made this progression in my life. What about my friends? And I have all different layers of friends. I have friends that Steve knew when we went to church together way back when, and uh, they look at me. Some of them love me unconditionally, and they know that my heart is to follow God with everything that is in there, no matter what I do. Some keep me at an arm's length. We're grocery store friends, you see them in the
Mhm.
grocery store and they come up and ask about you and the kids, but they don't want to go a lot deeper. So if you start this journey and you really get in on it, you're going to be ostracized, you're going to be pushed away, you're going to be hurt. But and that's the part that's hard and difficult, but the journey is easy because we're all kids. We're
Yeah.
all, what if you just had to wake up in the morning and say, okay, Father, what are we doing today?
Yeah.
What do we got on the agenda today? That's basically all it is. You're just getting up, and then when the first person comes in or you take the first phone call, you're saying, okay, God, is this the one? What do you want me to do? What should I say? And I mean, it's a blast. And when you start, the more you do it and you start taking the bigger steps, moves or jobs, or you take these crazy steps that only God can provide. I've had a couple instances like the one I shared with you about the move, where uh, I have heard like the physical presence of God just enveloped me and spoke to me. And when I got done, I just said, "Okay, it's your name on the line. It's not mine. I'm
Yeah.
gonna I'm gonna tell people what you told me, but it doesn't matter what happens because it's your name on the line." And to see him come through is time after time. It's actually fun. I mean, you
Yeah.
can ask Steve when God comes through, man. You just want to get up and shout it from the mountaintops. You want to get in the pulpit to be able to tell people. I was listening at the beginning. I was in my car and I was listening to the beginning of the show when you read the passage out of Hebrews. And if it's okay, I'll
Yeah.
share with you what I
Yeah.
approached
Please.
yesterday.
Please.
So yeah, I enjoyed our talk yesterday tremendously, tremendously, and so I'm reflecting on all of that and just kind of sitting back saying, okay, Lord, what would you want me to share tomorrow if I don't botch the whole thing, if I can say something, what should I say? And I was brought back to the time that God spoke to me, and He said, uh, I was in Ecclesiastes, the last verse of Ecclesiastes. And of course, Solomon's asking all those questions: what's life all about? And, what am I supposed to do? And then the last two verses of Ecclesiastes says, this is the conclusion of the whole matter. This is what I've figured out. And in King James and most of the versions, it says, fear God and keep his commands, because this is the whole duty of man. But as I started studying it, I came up with, and that's what I asked Steve about also. It's reverence God. It's not fear God, it's reverence God and keep his commands. Every utterance that comes out of the mouth of God, the Rhema word that you guys have spoken about. When people hear the commands, they think, okay, the 10 commandments, man, I failed on this one and this one. But it's no, reverence God and follow every command, everything that he tells you to do it, for this is your whole duty. This is what I made you for. And if we have that kind of relationship, but the translators, however it has come about, it has a heavy-handed fear God. Okay, God's some uh, big entity up there that wants us to be living in fear. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is your whole duty. Oh, geez, that sounds like a good time. But if I'm gonna reverence him and follow his commands every day, wow, that's exciting.
Yeah.
That's what more could you ask for? And it's simple.
Well,
But
and it's simple. And one of the things you know, I mentioned many times that when I was 12, I was kind of coerced into this whole thing, and then I just rejected it all until I had, I was really at the end of myself. And the thing I said to the Lord at that time was, I said, if you're real, you're going to have to show me that you're real. It's going to have to be like not. I have no doubt that it's real, and He showed me real power. Right? He really showed me, and Steve may challenge me on the term power. But what is interesting is it was like weight lifted off, and it was a physical thing, and it made me laugh. That's the most wonderful thing about it. I just laughed uncontrollably, and the implications of it were so huge. And of course, that's what just fueled, from September 10th of 2000 to here. But um, it's really, really cool. I've got a guest I want to bring in. Come here, Gage. Yep, come here, bud. So my son just came in. My daughter just dropped him off. Come on. I want to introduce you to these guys. It's fine. It's fine. Come here. So Gage, here, you gotta get down. Get down. Get down. All right, there you go. So this is Steve. Say hello to Steve.
Hi, Steve.
And
Hey,
then
Gage, how you doing?
this is the regular Joe right
Hey,
here.
how you doing?
These guys, these old looking guys here care so much about your dad that they would take time out to tell him about Jesus. Isn't that cool? Isn't that cool? So that's what we're doing. Isn't that neat?
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, buddy.
Hey, what position is Gage playing?
He's a wide receiver.
Ooh, man
Yeah.
after my own heart.
Yeah, he can catch, man. He can catch, and he's quick. He's quick. But right now he's in 6th grade. And this is 6th, 7th, and 8th grade football. And I'm going to tell you, the teams that we're playing, when you're in 8th grade, it's different than when you're in 6th grade.
Oh, yeah.
And these boys are men. I mean, when you see these guys with their helmets on in these other teams, and the majority of his team are younger kids, and I mean, they're grown men. They're taller than the coaches, and he gets destroyed. And it's hard right now. So I got to keep him. He loves the camaraderie. Actually, it's really interesting. I was always concerned that here he is, small in light of these other kids, and I thought, oh man, he's just going to get hit so hard, and he's going to be like, Dad, I want to be in theater. But he loves the camaraderie, and that's the thing that he's just super into. The locker room and the buddies and the fraternity of football versus just the game. And I'm happy that he enjoys that part of it, because we've got a really great school, and the coaches, it's a Christian school, and just they're focused on character building, not just winning games. So in Texas, that's a rare thing.
Yeah, especially in football. Yeah.
That's right. So it's fun.
Yeah. Well, in my day, kind of goes again, aging myself. We didn't call wide receivers. We called them flankers.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, that's how far back I go.
So
They were
you
called
couldn't
flankers.
couldn't score a touchdown until you put the ball in the end zone, right?
That's right. That was still the same.
You had to put the down it in the you had that leather helmet, right?
Yes, that's right.
Oh,
Maybe
you
the
could
goalpost many times was on the goal line.
Oh,
Isn't that
line.
crazy?
Yeah.
I cannot believe that was the case. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Who
You
came
imagine-
up with that plan?
Yeah. Could you imagine hitting that? And then in some cases there were 2 of them, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. Sorry for that interruption, but I just figured Gage needed to see
No.
what's going on.
Yeah, right on.
He hears it a lot. So
Yeah.
I'm often listening back to Steve, because I feel like when I'm doing this, live, I don't catch everything Steve is saying. And it's like, I got to listen back to this, and and many times I pick up so many more things there. So Joe, you, I want to make sure the point that you were making about the scripture reference is made. Can you expound on that a little bit? Because I shared the Hebrews piece. Not that maybe I've missed it, but I want to make sure that people understand what the point was there.
Yeah. So I'm just searching and saying, Lord, what is the purpose? What's the plan? And I'm reading through. He takes me to Ecclesiastes.
Yep.
12:13, the very end of the book, and Solomon says, this is the conclusion of the whole matter. You know, I've been looking at the purpose of life.
Yeah.
What's the conclusion of the whole matter? Fear God, keep his commands, and for this is the whole duty of man. Yeah, but you know, if you look at it like it was written, and that's what I wanted Steve to expound on for me yesterday when I contacted him, it's reverence God.
Yeah.
Give God your worship and your time and listen to him. Reverence God and keep his commands. Keep every utterance that comes out of the mouth of God, the Rhema, living word that you guys have talked about. So do what I ask you to do. Reverence me. And it's a perfect relationship. It's not a heavy-handed thing that, okay, I got to do this. No, it's man, this is part of the. Now, is it easy? No, it's hard. It's simple,
Yeah.
but it can be hard.
Well, and that's something that I think, Steve, you can shed some light on to here is, we've often talked about the shortness of life, you know, and especially when you have friends who pass or family members who pass or whatever, and then you reflect on the scriptures themselves and you see, hey, there are people who lived like 900 years. And then there's some things you could even drill further into, that there was, you know, the Sumerian kings list, that you could get into some really serious long lives. But here we have post flood, this 120 maximum kind of thing that seems pretty much the framework now. And, you know, I've reflected that, you know, is that the grace of God, right? That we would actually have a shortened life here. And I think one of the things you said the other day, you said the Peter, James, and John go up and see Jesus transfigured, and they see Moses and Elijah. And you said to me, and it just, I can't like get it out of my mind. You're like, what were they conferring about? What were they talking about? And what you said was they were talking to him because they're alive. And that to me was like this big aha moment to say, you know, I don't know that I've thought about this, that Moses and Elijah are alive. And that it makes me think that, hang on a second, this is not life. And I'm not trying to discredit what we're doing here, right? And I don't want to make it seem futile. But what are your thoughts as it relates to the fact that in the context of eternity, we're in a interesting position that will come and go, and what our experience of limited view is temporary. How do you square that stuff up? And as it relates to, you know, we got work to do, been created, it's all custom tailored for us. There's a yoke, it's easy, it's right, it's not easy, it's reverent, it's huge, but it's also personal. You know, thief on the cross, today you'll be with me in paradise, versus, you know, the prodigal versus the son who's at home. What are your thoughts on all that? Because what we've been talking a lot about is, why are we here? What's the purpose of this whole thing? And I feel like I'm understanding it more and more. How do you square it all off?
Well, yeah, you mention the, you know, the Matthew 17, you know, what we have come to learn, most of us, the transfiguration, where a week before Jesus told his disciples, some of you are not going to see death until you actually see the Son of Man in his glory, in his kingdom. Well, we have, because of the way we've been trained, we hear Son of Man as meaning Jesus.
Yeah.
But hey, Jesus is the great communicator. He could have very easily said, some of you are not going to see death until you see me in the glory of my kingdom. He didn't say that. Well, Jesus, why didn't you say that? Why did you just say Son of Man? Because Son of Man are all of us who have been born and occupy the planet. So some of you are not going to see death until you see the full expression of what my Father has in mind for his man in his kingdom. So what does it say? And one says, 6 days later, another says 8 days later, but week later, what happens is we have the Mount of Transfiguration exchange. And Jesus is transfigured, and standing with him are Moses and Elijah. And they are conferring. Well, see, to me, I don't want to conclude what that is. I want to know what that is. So, Jesus, what does that mean? What's going on there? What are you guys talking about? What the heck was that all about? Well, Steve, what is the role of man? Why was man created? Oh, yeah, well, the first time you asked me that question, I didn't know the answer. I was told some stuff that really didn't make any sense. But then the day came when you told me what the answer to that question was, that the Father's vision for creating was that his man would rule his creation with him in the fullness of his nature and character. Well, yes. What do you think was going on there? I was conferring with my partners in the execution of our Father's vision that we would rule his creation with him in the fullness of his nature and character. So we were conferring on the administration of this particular phase of my Father's plan. And we were surveying the landscape to determine what the issues were that we needed to address, so that my younger men who are following and learning how this works can observe this and see how this happens. Now, what happened to them? Out of the honesty of their heart that came about in their training, Peter says, oh, wow, it's a good thing that we're here.
Yeah.
Which is true. But then he said, let us make a tabernacle, one for Jesus, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Not thinking what the heck he was talking about. All right. Now this kind of gets into, kind of the crux of our conversations here in today. And so what he was talking about is that, and didn't realize what he was saying, was that by making a tabernacle to each one, he was making Jesus equivalent to Moses and Elijah. Well, what was Moses and Elijah to them? It was the law and the prophets, their scriptures. And at that moment, the Father interrupted and said, no, boys, let me explain it to you. My son has no equivalent. Listen to him. All right. Now, in your verse, what does it say? What is the opening line?
Yeah.
See, pay close attention, be attentive, discern, perceive, right? And listen to him who speaks. Well, if you go into the Ecclesiastes 12:13 that Joe's talking about into the definitions, it says, be attentive, listen, and be attentive to everything that the Elohim speaks. Everything that God speaks. The same identical words. Okay? Why? Because it's on the planet that we learn how to listen to his voice, to work with him, and to begin the process of learning how to rule with him in the fullness of his nature and character.
Steve, man, this opens
And we
up.
didn't set any of this up, by the way.
I know. It's so amazing. You know what?
Observation. So,
please.
So this has been a 40-year journey for me. We're entering or getting close to 40 years of interacting with Steve. And we've only actually been together face to face for just 2-3 years that we spent a lot of time together. And the rest of this has been communicating over the miles and meetings in between. And I feel like I'm a slow learner. It's taken me 40 years to get to this place, but I think God is using you, Matt, and Steve at this juncture to get this message out in a way that it is like exponential to people, because what I'm hearing every week with this just reiterates what I've been going through for 40 years, and people are getting it all at once, and I am loving it all at once. Matt, you do a great job of reiterating. Sometimes Steve can talk in professorial ways that, you're, when he gets done, you're thinking, oh man, but you come in and you give it the Matt touch, which makes it understandable to an average guy like me. You guys are just a great team, the back and forth, and I just feel like I am learning all over again at a quicker, faster rate that enables me then to take the message. I've been with Steve many, many times. I've introduced him to a lot of people. I kind of, in past years, I was his handler. I got him from meeting to meeting to meeting with people. And I watched, and people would just hang on every word, because it was God, it was God using him and speaking, and they would hang on every word. And when he left, they would be shaking their heads and wondering who they talked to. But then they would succumb to the choking of tradition and have a really hard time breaking free.
Well, we did a Gen Con, this generosity conference, and you throw these things together and you're like, well, you just don't know what's going to come out of it, right? And the intention was generosity. And I said, hey, Steve, you got to come and talk at this. And the exact same thing happened, Joe, right? He was talking about the high places. And I'm going to tell you, for that hour, there was not a sound. It was like, pin drop kind of thing. And the exact same thing. Everybody's heads reeling afterwards going, what just happened? It's so encouraging to me in all of this stuff is that, and I think it should be encouraging to you, Steve, and to you, Joe. As I reflect on kind of where we are generationally, and, I often talk about Gen X. I grew up, my brothers were in computers, right, at the very, very early days. And I was the young kid brother, right? And I didn't really have tremendous amount of use for it, but they were big time nerds. And, I think about the life I've lived, right? I've got one foot firmly in a phone booth, right? Meaning analog, right? The analog world, right? The rotary phone. And then on the flip side, this whole digital thing that's changed. And what's interesting about straddling that chasm as Gen X is that there are wonderful things about the analog world, right? And it's like, well, we're in this crisis era. And I think the good news is this, I see the headlines, and I've, worked with ministries and churches and all this stuff. And, people lament the fact that especially mainline churches are just dying on young people, right? They're just not attracting young people. And they're like, oh no, what's the future of the church? And what I'm seeing is something way, way greater. And it's interesting, the battle that you guys have both faced, which is really, you've been riding this bucking bronco of the church, right? That's like, I don't have that same experience. And the cool thing, I think, to encourage you guys, I'm not fighting with church people at all. And it's really cool that this is what Jesus is doing. And, honestly, this for me, Steve and Joe, you give me the confidence and the courage to speak boldly. Because when I started this channel 2 years ago, I was like, I'm doing this crypto thing, man. Pump my bags. We need some cash, man. I mean, that was the strategy. And it turned into, really, because of David Lee and his wife having stage 4 colon cancer, that led all this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of saying, hey, what are we really doing here? What is this really about? So I want you guys to be encouraged that what you're sharing and this stuff, I think, is having new life at the right time. Because you've talked, Steve, about the appointed time or the fullness of time. And I really think that all this preparation is for this time, because you're right. The ability for this to traverse the world, we never had that before.
Yeah.
And the truth is, it resonates, period. So I really value it and appreciate the perspective.
Well, for my part, it kind of takes you back into my beginnings into this. There was no vocabulary for these things. I mean, they were literally raw concepts that words had to, not necessarily new words created, but words being given, applied to a situation that gave an entirely new meaning and understanding. And so there was, the number of times in like going through with Joe, one of the gifts that Joe and Ginger and their family has been to me, and others in that area at that time, is Jesus gave me people that I could actually start speaking these things to and hear what I was saying to them, and then observe what the effect of that was, because there was no vocabulary. And the meanings assigned to the vocabulary were heretical inside the church. And so, here you are seeing this brand new, Matt, in your words, what the real gospel is.
Yeah.
Well, that real gospel was anathema inside the church because it competed with the doctrinal statements of faith in those churches. And so to try to communicate in a way that learn to communicate in a way that transferred the meaning and the ideas and the intentions took a very, very long time to occur. Joe mentioned the church where we met. The pastor at that church, to kind of give you an idea, had a PhD, was very high up in that, was a man of some notoriety in that denomination. And we would meet almost every week for lunch. And we would have these conversations, and he was so impacted by them that he would then take them and preach them the next Sunday. And it was like, oh, wow. But he was never able to make it made for great preaching material because it was so new to him, but he fit it inside the doctrinal perspective and could never take the next step to say, okay, Jesus, what say you about this thing? He could never take that next step. He had to always fit it inside the scriptures to make sure that it lined up with the scriptures, which is what he was taught, which was what I was taught, which is what I believe. Joe believed that. But guess what? That isn't what the Father said. He didn't say check to see if it lines up with the law and the prophets. He said listen to him. Yeah. And that is the step that changes it all.
Let's examine that for a second, because I think that's the crux of a huge amount of conflict. Yeah. And so let's. I want to really get your perspective on this and dive into this, because I think this is really where the rubber meets the road and all this stuff. My experience with you, Steve, has been, a constant drive to say, hey, Matt, why don't you ask him yourself, right? So that's been at the core of this. And I have yet to have, and you may have some examples, but I have yet to have anything come out of our last year that I felt was directly contradictory to the Word of God. I have not seen a single situation where I was like, yeah, Jesus told me to go kill my neighbor. And I'm being dramatic, obviously, but I'm actually more, it's more reinforcing the depth and beauty of the Word of God in its original than it is. So in a way, I want to be really sensitive to that, to say, well, if you're listening to Jesus, he's going to tell you stuff that's not that isn't supported by the structure, nature, and character and what is said in the Bible. Actually, if anything, I think it's reinforced it more than ever. What do you say to that? Because you did just express that there are times when he'll say stuff that isn't. So I want to make sure we split that hair the right way, because I don't sense anything that you've talked to me about is like heretical, honestly.
Well, the thing that I would offer in response on your personal side is because you, to my observation, you have bought entirely into Jesus. I'm not listening to anybody but you. You alone have the authority to speak to me.
Right.
So when you hear things like that, now you're hearing through the filter of Jesus to the things that are being said in the scriptures, and you see total alignment.
Right.
Okay. But that's not how we're taught inside the church. What we do is we look through the scriptures to Jesus, and then to whatever the event is, through the filter of the scriptures.
Yeah.
And when that happens, what we're doing is we are measuring Jesus by the script, by what we say is the infallible word of God. But what is it really is, it's our interpretation and perspective of the scriptures.
Yeah.
And so if you hear that, see, now that's when you get screwed up. Let me give you an example. Okay. Well, I just gave you an example, the first example in 1 Corinthians.
Yeah. Yeah.
See, he's not talking about, spiritual gifts. He's talking about spiritualities and how shrewd they are to get you to do stuff.
Yeah.
And by the way, we're observing it right there in the translation in live and living color.
You know what's crazy is this in crypto, you know what we call this? We call this counterparty risk. I mean, it's what it is.
Yeah,
it's what it is. It's counterparty risk. It's like, when you think about this, it's funny that the systems are set up this way. And I found this in my whole career. Everybody wants to get in between you and your money.
Yeah.
Right. And this is, I did fundraising for all these years. And it's like everybody wants to put themselves as a toll booth in between you and your money, or you and God. And you think about a lot of the things that Jesus did was saying, man has set up these barriers. He set up this, this intermediary. And of course, what do the scriptures say about Jesus, right? If you think about it, there's only one.
Yeah.
And, there's only one way. But, it's interesting to think of, when you said looking through the Bible, right? When my church says you need to come under the authority of the Bible, well, you've inserted a counterparty.
Yeah.
You've inserted a counterparty. And if you require that I filter it through this, it's not direct any longer. No. And it's powerful. It's huge. It's huge.
Well, it's transformational in the way that it affects you and the way that you see things. Yeah. That you're no longer looking through a filter. You're no longer looking to Jesus yesterday we talked about being event oriented, which was a part of our very first stream on the right side up. We're trained to be event oriented. And so we view the macro through the filter of the event. And when we see that, or vice versa, we see the event through the filter of the macro.
Yep.
And in both instances, it is distorted because it's not true. What is true is now you get on top of that and say, okay, Jesus, what are you seeing here? And then you start seeing the strategic element that's in play, and then the parties that have created that strategy and who are implementing it, and then how they're doing it. And it's going, oh, that's what's happening. Yeah. This event is like the fruit on a tree. It is the produce of something that precedes it. Why in the world would I try to evaluate the totality of what's going on based upon an event, a fruit? No, I want to step back. I want to see the nature of the tree. I want to see the age of the tree. I want to see what it's feasting on. I want to see what it's drawing its nutrients from. Oh, what it's intended to do. Man, now the story is starting to crystallize and become crystal clear. Yeah. That's how we were created, to see, think, and reason, and then out of that, exercise our rulership with Jesus. Well, that's individual.
Yeah.
See, that's not me looking at you and saying how you need to get your life straightened out. It's
Yeah.
me saying, hey, here's how Jesus has trained me to look and see at these things, and it's transformational.
It's
why would you go back?
It's so incredible. It's so incredible. And I know each of us has a story like this, but this is where the rubber meets the road, right? How does this play itself out? I've told this story in this series before, but I think it's worth sharing again. I had a buddy that worked for me who needed a car, and my brother-in-law was selling a car, but he didn't have the money. He's like, "Hey, will you loan me the money to buy the car, but I'll pay you back when I can." And I'm like, "All right, fine." Well, he would pay me back kind of monthly in like $400 chunks, right? So I'd end up having like $400 in my pocket, cash, on a monthly basis. And every single time I carried that $400 around in my pocket, God would talk to me about it. And I went out to see some band play down in Lower Greenville in Dallas with a buddy of mine. And we come out of this bar club, and guys are standing around smoking cigarettes, and this guy kind of comes out of the darkness, and he's the kind of the local homeless guy. And my buddy lives down there, and he's like, "Oh, hey Gary, how you doing?" And Gary's got some eczema issue with his hands, and you can tell he's not doing so well. And he's like, "Hey man, can you guys, well, one, give me a cigarette, and two, can you give me a ride?" And so we're like, yeah, no problem. So we give him a ride down the street, and the Lord says to me, "Hey, you need to give him some money." And I'm like, "I don't want to give him any money." And so I got $400 in my pocket, and this has happened multiple times. And I sitting there, and I'm like, "All right, fine." So we park, and I'm like, "Well, what am I supposed to say to him?" Just tell him I told you to give it to him. I said, "Okay, fine." So we park the car, and I'm saying, "Hey, Gary, I don't know you, right? My buddy knows you. The Lord's telling me to give you some money." "Oh, thanks so much." So I think I pull $20 out of my pocket, and I hand it to him. And as soon as I hand it to him, the Lord says, "Give it all to him." And I'm like, "No." And I'm like, "Crap." And so I literally reach in my pocket, I pull it out, and I'm like, "All right, Gary, the Lord told me to give you this." And he just could not believe it, right? $400, right? The money from this car payment. And I handed this guy $400, and he went on his way. 2 years later, I'm moving from Dallas down to Central Texas. And I'm literally, when you're in the middle of moving and you're sweating and it's summer in Texas, and I'm sweating bullets, and I get a call on my phone, and it's my buddy from that night. And he goes, "Hey, Gary wants to talk to you." I'm like, "What? Gary who?" He's like, "That guy. Remember you gave him that $400. So Gary gets on the phone, and he's real sober, and he goes, "Hey man, remember when you gave me that $400? I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "I got to give it back to you." And I'm like, No, it's okay, man. No worries. How you doing, man? Are you doing okay?" He says, "Yeah, man. You remember that night you gave me that $400? I went and I bought crack with it. And I got so high, the Lord Jesus appeared to me and told me to stop doing crack. So I did."
Right. Yeah.
And he said, basically, Lord Jesus appeared to him, told him to stop doing crack. So he stopped doing crack. And then he started going to the, AA meetings and telling everyone. And just imagine this guy telling everyone, the Lord Jesus will appear to you and tell you to stop doing crack.
Right.
So he ended up getting his life together, started playing, like, I think, bass in the church band down in his neighborhood. And of course, I tell that story to go, that you don't look through the scriptures to find that.
No.
Right. Or the doctrines of because honestly, I've had experiences in the church where it's like, we don't give money to anyone unless they go through counseling.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I had no choice. Like that was and I know each of us have those stories, and those that walk with him know that it's not like he gives you a bunch of time to go consider the scriptures. He's just like, do it now. And you're like, okay, I can choose not to. That's where it's all happening, right?
Yes.
Am I right? I mean, I want to just communicate that actually happens.
Well, was sharing a story the other day about, he went through both in the move down or up to Champaign, and then when the Lord pulled the plug and said it's over. Joe, you may want to share some of
Yeah,
that, but it's the
please.
same deal.
Yeah. Through a set of circumstances, we lived where we live right now, and through a set of circumstances, felt the Lord calling us to Champaign Urbana to be part of a ministry internship program, which means no pay. It means you come and pay your way, and we'll let you hang out with us. Uh, and so we just everything about it felt right, and I told myself I would just take some cold showers and it'd be over with. And uh, in the shower, the Lord spoke to me. When you're just there naked in front of him, he spoke to me. He said, "Hey, I want you to go, and I'll provide the way." And I said, "Listen, this grandmas are here, grandpas are here, nieces, nephews, and I am not telling my wife that we're moving to Champaign, Illinois is 10 hours away." I said, "If you want us to go, God, you tell her,
Wow.
and then I'll know."
Talk about conferring.
Oh, it's one of those things, again, where you put him on the spot. It's your name on the line. And God has never struck me down or said, "You idiot," or, I've never had that kind of, it's just, okay, then president's gone. And I finish up, and 2 days later, I'm at work. Telephone rings. My wife bawling like a baby. I thought somebody had died, something had happened. I said, "What's going on?" She goes, "God just told me that we're supposed to move to Champaign, that we're supposed to go out there." I said, "Oh man, this is getting more real by the minute." And I told her the story. He showed her scripture and told it was like the ark. He said, "I want you to get on the ark before the doors shut."
Mm.
Said, "We got to go." She said, "We got to go." So
Wow.
we made the plans. I actually I've been a salesman before I taught, and now that I'm done, I've been selling stuff all my life. I actually worked for Steve as a sales manager of a company that he was managing for a while. Uh, but we made the plans to go to Champaign Urbana. We had a moving van there to load up our belongings, and we'd been looking for houses. Nothing had come through just to rent. We weren't in a position to buy. And so we loaded up the moving van and gave the guys a phone number and said, "When you get to Champaign, call this number and we'll tell you where to unload." And we were just hours ahead of them when we got to Champaign, and God had worked it out through people. They took us and showed us a house, and when the movers uh, arrived, called that number, we said, "Yeah, we need you to unload at this address." It was that close, but again, so confirming that God is in control. Something that Steve has told me all along. I have a tendency to look at things used to have more of a tendency to look at things that are happening in the world and say, "Oh my gosh," get on edge about it. The things that are going on in Russia and Ukraine and all over the world and all the crisis and everything. You know what? God created it all. He's not surprised. God is ahead of the curve. And if we can, he's the captain of the boat, and all we got to do is put our faith and trust in him. While you guys were talking this last time, I just thought God has us in this place and time. He made us and has us here for this time, for this purpose, that we're made for. So to me, that's exciting. That's exciting. I meet with a group of three guys in our little town who are all spiritually hungry. They're entrenched in a local congregation, but they are hungry. And I have to kick them out of my house on Wednesday nights. I have to set a time limit and say, "Okay, guys, that's it for this week." And then they stand out in front of my house. I walk out the back door. They stand in front of my house and they talk for another half hour to an hour out in front of my house. I can't get them to go home. I love them to death. I love what God's doing.
Yeah.
And it may only appear to be the four of us, but God has us there for a reason, and I can't wait to see what it's going to be.
Wow.
Right on.
Right on. And Steve, you said He's the sheep recognize the voice of the shepherd,
Yes,
right?
they
And
do.
the shepherd is out front.
Yeah.
And it's so encouraging to know. And I think that's the if I were to wrap it up with a bow, I'd say he is strategic. He's out front. We recognize his voice. And just like he said to the disciples, just follow me. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. Okay. All right. Well, and it does seem it's like get ready. If you got some interest, you want to be in the game, the journey is incredibly satisfying. But for the next time, because we've gone over our time limit again, which is awesome. I really want to examine some things that have come up here, Steve, in our next go around. But Joe, awesome to have you. Thank you so much for sharing this, and it's better. It always is better than I ever anticipate. So thank you so much
I
for.
can mark this. It wasn't on my bucket list, but I'm gonna put it on my bucket list. I can mark it off now. I made a podcast.
That's right. That's
I
right.
made it. So
We'll have to have you back again. We'll have it's so good to have that, and it's and I'll kind of give you the last word on this, Steve. There's something about having it's the community piece of this too, but it's also different perspectives, right? It almost seems like there's all sorts of different ways in which people will try to use their vocabulary to describe the greatness and fullness and beauty of what God is doing in the world, and it just every time you add someone new to it, it's a new facet, if you will.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And insofar as my personal interest and motivation in this is I love sharing the experience with folks. I mean, it's back to the movie model of marketing, right?
Yeah.
Man, I saw a great movie, and man, you need to go see this movie. It is awesome. And I'm probably going to go see it 3 or 4 times myself. That's my attitude in the sharing. But even beyond the sharing, and I've shared this with Jesus many years ago, and that, man, if this isn't the real deal, I don't care how many goosebumps or how exciting it is. I'm really not interested. I've got other things to do. And what I have seen through Joe and others, and in the more short term with you, Matt, it makes it worthwhile in sharing. Mike Ostel,
Yep.
Cadium.
Yep.
This is the real deal, which is what makes it so exciting to share. Not that I have to convince anybody of anything.
Yep.
I love the comments that come in. I don't intend to correct anybody in that.
Yep.
It's, hey, that gives the opportunity to Jesus agree with you. If
Yep.
he does, cool. Go for that. But it's the exhilaration that comes out of the experiences that are so out in left field. You just cannot conceive or contrive the event. It just comes out of nowhere. And then when you share it with others and they start buying into it, they start coming out with their own experiences that demonstrate that, hey, this is not a fairy tale. This is the real deal. Just give it a try.
Yeah.
And that's what's exciting to me out of the whole thing. And Joe and you are both examples of that.
Yeah. Well, and what made someone like Paul walk around the Mediterranean 4 times and be shipwrecked on Malta if it wasn't something that he was excited to tell people to see this film?
Yeah.
And it's like we're just the extension of all of that, just saying, hey, look at this.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Steve. I'll catch you in the
Steve.
green room. I'll do
You
the outro, and I'll see you in a second. Thank you, guys.
Good deal. Thank you. See you, folks.
Wow. Once again, number 25, Right Side Up with Steve Staggs. This has been incredible. I really look forward to this. And, sometimes, you're like 2 hours. That's a lot of time. And it feels like it goes by so fast. I'm just, I'm really thankful to have Joe come in, and it just adds to this, right? There's like this, strength in numbers, right? Knowing that there are other people out there that sometimes you're like, hey, am I crazy? Let's try this on for size. These things are happening. Is this what other people are experiencing? And it's amazing. But I think that it summed up to me like taste and see that the Lord is good, right? This idea that on you can try this out, you can try it on for size, right? And it's a really interesting journey. And I think the thing I want to talk to Steve about next time is, I try to examine everything, right? Like into physics and into this whole UFO disclosure stuff and all the crazy things that are happening in the world and crypto and money and new economic system and all of these things and how all this stuff fits together. I'm really, really, interested in talking about how all of this stuff is coming together. Because I think that, Steve spent the time, asking, hey, how does this all fit together? And he's written a number of things about this. And I'm excited at some point in time. I think those things are going to be, shared with the world, to be able to experience and understand and dive into these things. But hopefully this is giving you a taste of it because it's something you got to experience yourself, right? You can't just, hey, take my word for it. You gotta try it on yourself. So folks, thanks for joining the Pulse again today. Right Side Up with Steve Staggs, episode number 25. That's 50 hours in the books. Take care of yourself, folks. Have a great weekend and don't mess with Texas. Really, don't mess with Texas.